我们再一次用热情的掌声来欢迎中央研究院政治学研究所的所长吴重礼教授，欢迎吴教授，有请吴教授，欢迎。
This is Changli Wu. I'm the director of the Institute of Political Science at Academia Sinica. And I'm more than happy having this opportunity to chair this panel, especially the four forums that is pretty important for our national defense. The title will be the International Military Integrity Academic Forum. And in this panel, the opening remark will be introduced by Josie Stewart. Josie, are you there? Stewart. Oh yeah, right. He's going to play roughly 5 minutes video tape, and after that we are going to invite Mr. Michael Ofori-Mensah. Okay, just wave your hand to us. Michael, are you there? Okay. So Michael is you're going to present your talk. Roughly 30 to 35 minutes, and then after that, is that okay? And after that, we are going to open to the floor and to asking our panelists to have more discussion, and then we are going to focusing on some like corruption, risks, and defense governance, and then how can we evaluate national integrity, something like this. And then we have several panelists and discussants in this work. And then the first one will be the Peter Robertson. Peter, are you there? Peter. Hi, Peter.
Yes, I'm here.
So you should in Taiwan we say good afternoon. So in the United States you might be say good evening or something, right? What time? What is your time right now?
9:30 p.m.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. And then Peter is a professor of public administration at South California, yes, USC. And then the second one will be my colleague. His name is Jobin. Paul, are you there? Paul,
yes, hello,
hi. Hi, Paul. Actually, Paul is my colleague. He's an associate research fellow. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's a associate research fellow at the Institute of Sociology at Academia Sinica. And then the third one will be the Xavier Didier. He is a military senior editor. Xavier, are you there?
I'm there.
Hi. So where are you right now? Actually, in Taiwan, it is roughly 1:30.
Yeah, I'm in Shilin, so it's exactly the same time as yours.
Okay, got it. All right. So besides these 3 discussants, we also have the 6 discussants inside. The first one will be the 张应中处长，处长在这边。And then 第2位是萧宏金萧老师。然后第3位是苏子云苏老师，大家可能常常在电视上看到苏老师。然后第4位呢是陈俊明陈老师，俊明老师。然后接下来是周怡坚，少将，哇，然后最后一位呢是严明德严上校。All right, so I have the brief introduction of the whole panel. And then, as I say, we are going to play the 5 minutes video, and then after that, Michael was going to present us kinds of the 30 to 35 minutes presentation to focusing on the corruption risks and defense governances. And after that, we are going to have more discussions, especially from our panelists. All right, so let's proceed. So we're going to play the 5 minutes video. Thank you.
Everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to greet you today. I'm Josie Stewart, Programme Director, Transparency International Defence and Security. For those of you who don't know us, we are a global programme of the Transparency International movement hosted by the Transparency International UK chapter. Our objective is to ensure that defence and security institutions are accountable to their publics and subject to civilian democratic control and oversight so that corruption risks are reduced. We work towards a world where governments, the armed forces and armed transfers are transparent, accountable and free from corruption. Our work is based on an in-depth knowledge of the defence and security sector and the specific types of corruption it faces. It's informed by ongoing political economy and contextual analysis. We seek to influence globally and regionally, but also to work in partnership with national civil society, specifically through Transparency International national chapters. We also seek to work through and with coalitions and networks with reform-minded actors to bring about change. The GDI, our Government Defence Integrity Index, is a key research project which we produce on a 5-year cycle. The GDI assesses corruption risks in the defence sector of over 80 countries around the world, and the most recent iteration was published at the end of last year alongside an analytical report of the data produced. You'll hear more about the GDI from my colleague Michael later. Defined as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain has a detrimental impact on economic development, political cohesion, and society's ability to handle grievances and reconcile conflicting agendas and interests. It exacerbates inequality, fuels a sense of exclusion for whole groups, increases state fragility, and diminishes the legitimacy and effectiveness of governments. Crucially, the impact of corruption can contribute to the outbreak of violent conflict. One study found a correlation between levels of corruption and levels of peace and identified a tipping point at which small increases in corruption have prompted large increases in violence. Corruption should therefore be a critical priority for those concerned with security and defence issues. Corruption in defence, security and justice sectors can have a significant impact on the outbreak and continuation of violent conflict. We've seen this play out around the world time and again, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Nigeria, Mali and Colombia, not to mention Ukraine. Corruption undermines states and the ability of states in 4 key areas. First, it wastes resources that could be spent either on preparing the armed forces to provide human and state security or in other areas of critical government expenditure. Second, it fuels conflict by diminishing trust in state institutions, exacerbating societal divisions, and enabling armed flows to militia and extremist groups. Third, corrupt militaries deprive countries of the ability to respond to a security crisis. Corruption can lead to hollowed out, inept armed forces that are not capable of providing security when it's most needed. Fourth, corruption undermines international interventions aiming to restore stability and peace. The findings of our GDI, therefore, should be of concern to anyone interested in peace and security, and in particular in the role of the defence and security sectors. As a civil society organisation, we developed this index not with a view to naming and shaming, but with a view to providing a high-quality, qualitative data set that others interested in reform can use to reduce corruption risks in defence sectors. We're therefore keen to share these findings with you all as we work to support national civil society and reform-minded governments to bring about change. Thank you very much.
Please give a big hand to Mrs. Jessie Stewart. Thank you. Okay, it is a great honor to invite Head of Research, Transparency International Defense and Security Program, Mr. Michael Ofori-Mensah, to talk about Design and Transform of Government Defense Integrity Index, GDI. Hello, Michael. Are you there with us? Hello, Michael? Okay, just wait for a little bit.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please give a big hand to Michael.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or good morning for where I am, and good day to you wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually. My presentation on corruption risk and defense governance, which focus on the findings from the 2020 Government Defense Integrity Index. And this presentation will be structured in 3 parts. First, I'll provide an overview of the design and methodology underpinning the GDI. Next, I'll share some of the key global findings from the 2020 iteration of the index. And then finally, I'll provide some selected trends for Asia Pacific compared to the rest of the world and outline some policy recommendations. So, to start with, what is the GDI? Well, the GDI measures corruption risk, essentially institutional resilience to corruption in national defense establishments. Assessing these risks are vital simply because corruption in the defense and security sector has a particularly detrimental impact on states' ability to maintain peace and security. Indeed, corruption, as numerous evidence from research has shown, is a root cause of conflict, not just the consequence of it. But I have to emphasize that the GDI does not measure corruption. Rather, it's an evidence-based comprehensive assessment of the quality of institutional controls which are aimed at managing the risk of corruption. And in doing so, it focuses both on policy making and public sector governance in defense establishments. Now, the essential aim of the index is to set good practice standards for governance of the defense sector globally. So what it examines in effect is the existence, the enforcement, and the effectiveness of control. So if for instance, the legal framework exists, the index looks to assess whether it's enforced, and if it's enforced, we assess whether it's effective. And this is done by assessing legal frameworks and implementation, as well as resources and outcomes. And it's intended to capture the implementation gap between law and practice. We assess 5 risk areas in the index: financial risk, personal risk, political risk, procurement risk, and operational risk. The GDI is undertaken on a 5-year cycle. The last iteration was in 2020, and it covered 86 countries across the world. Let me just provide a brief overview of the key risk areas of the index. As I mentioned, there were 5 key risk areas. But under these 5 risk areas, there are 77 questions, which are further broken down into 212 risk indicators. And each indicator looks at a specific case of corruption risk. So, in policy making and political affairs, for instance, we look at whether there's legislative scrutiny of defense policy. And the index assesses each country for measures to look at good practice. And what does good practice look like in defense policy making? For instance, is there a published national defense and security strategy? And is there a strategic approach to anti-corruption? In terms of defense finances, as you can see here, there are several areas that the index will assess. For instance, asset disposals. What is the oversight of security budgets? And what does good practice look like? Well, good practice in this case will look at whether there are strong controls of asset disposals, whether there's audits, and are they effective? And, for instance, no off-budget expenditure, as well as well-justified security spending. In the area of personnel, the index assesses whether there are clear standards for personnel, regular anti-corruption training taking place, and good practice would capture issues such as strong and robust systems for appointments and promotions, as well as for reporting wrongdoing. In the case of military operations, a very critical area, the index assesses issues ranging from whether anti-corruption training for deployed personnel is in place, and also whether corruption risk in the host country is assessed prior to missions. And then in the fifth area of procurement, the index assesses a range of issues in terms of contract award and delivery, and whether there's compliance with procurement legislation, and most importantly also to ensure whether there is competition in procurement, and between, for instance, which proportion of the procurement that a nation carries out is subject to single sourcing, and which proportion is subject to open competition. So having provided this overall quick overview of these key risk areas and the area and the sub-areas that it integrates, the index interrogates, let me now turn my attention to provide a bit of a snapshot of the research process that underpins the index. The research for each country is conducted by an expert country assessor, usually a PhD student, a PhD level researcher, a senior journalist and academic, who's normally resident in the country being assessed. And the assessor will be using a standard set of questions, as well as the GDI scoring rubric. Assessors draw primarily on key official documents, so they would bring in both primary and secondary data, and are expected to conduct both desk research, interviews with key individuals in government, military, academia, civil society, and of course allowing for confidentiality to protect the safety of informants. The qualitative data must be original. We also expect that each indicator that is examined is supported by at least 2 recent sources. But of course, that is except in the case of de jure indicators, where there is only one piece of, let's say, guiding legislation, or let's say a constitution, that would then stand alone as a single source. And given that scores are awarded on the basis of both quantitative and qualitative data, with a heavy reliance on narrative justifications, it is very important that all the evidence must be properly cited, and then, of course, triangulated for accuracy and objectivity. So the sources used range from policy documents, official speeches, interviews, as I mentioned, with officials and experts. Each assessment is then independently reviewed by 2 individuals separately, expert peer reviewers, who in most cases are senior academics or senior experts who have maybe worked in policy over a period of time on that specific country. And where possible also, we invite all governments, we write to all governments to also review the assessments. And where there are Transparency International national chapters, we also ask them to review the assessment, submit additional information. Now, in between all these steps, the assessments come back to Transparency International for quality checks and reviews. We send them back to the assessors to provide additional input. And then finally, when it's all completed, all assessments undergo a final validation, comparing every indicator in comparison to other countries in the index in order to ensure that there's a standardized set of scoring. I may hasten to add here that there was a methodology change between this recent iteration of the index and the one in 2015. while the main 77 questions remain unchanged, the underlying scoring rubric is different. And there were two major changes. First was the introduction of indicators. So in 2015, there were 77 questions which were just scored. But then these 77 questions in 2020 were then broken down into different aspects. And I'll show you an example in a minute. So if we asked whether the legislative scrutiny of defense policy was effective, we would then break it down into whether the legislation exists, and if it exists, if it's enforced, and then if it's enforced, if it's effective. And I'll show you an example in a minute. So the breaking down of the questions into different indicators that allows the assessor to drill down in fine detail on a variety of issues across the board of defense sector governance in order to provide a comprehensive reflection of the risk areas. That was the first change. The second was the inclusion of the scoring rubric, which provides a guidance on good practice, on what good practice looks like. So the model answers serve as a good guide, good practice guidance for defense institutions and assessments. And also it enhances standardized scoring. Now, due to this methodology change, comparisons between the 2015 index and the 2020 index should be limited to individual questions or individual indicators only, if done at all. We advise that that is not the comparisons between the two not done, because they would not reflect the same case. Subsequent iterations, let's say the 2025 index, would make it comparable. Now, as a result of the methodology change, in order to reflect the significant methodology changes, the decision was made to change the name of the index from what was previously known as the Government Defense Anti-Corruption Index to the Government Defense Integrity Index. And the name change, of course, reflects the focus on building institutional controls within the defense sector and as government as a whole. So this is what I was just mentioning just a moment ago, that if this was in 2015, we were just asking this very broad question: is there formal provision for effective and independent legislative scrutiny of defense policy? And it was broken down in 2020 into the formal rights, whether they exist. So does Parliament have formal rights in law to approve or veto those integrity? And that would be scored. Then whether it's effective, whether Parliament regularly approves or vetoes laws. And then finally, if it does so, it's what the independent scrutiny, how whether there is executive or military influence over Parliament. So this basically provides us with a bit more detail. And the scoring rubric for the index has 5 levels, from 0, which basically represents very little institutional resilience or none, to 100, which basically captures very strong and robust institutional resilience to corruption or very low risk of corruption. Now, the scoring rubric, the assessment for every country is aggregated. Basically, first of all the indicators are then aggregated, simple average for each question. Now, all questions are then aggregated into one risk area. Again, using simple average. And then all summed up, across the 5 indicators to provide the overall score for a country. Now, the overall scores are then assigned to a band from A to F, which is intended to reflect the level of corruption risk, not corruption, in defense sector institutions. And the bands can be viewed, as you can see on the right-hand side here, in relation to not just the corruption risk, but the institutional resilience to corruption. In addition to providing bonds for each country and assigning bonds based on the average where a country falls into, we also provide scorecards for each country. Now, the scorecards we publish show scores for each question, and then it provides a snapshot of the areas of strength and where work is required. So just a quick scan through the different questions and the scoring allows just as a snapshot for one to see where are the areas of strength and which areas also require work, just based on just a quick glance. So having now introduced the GDI and spoken about the research process, let's now turn our attention to what are the key findings from the 2020 index. Well, the GDI global findings, I must say, are a big cause for concern. The global results show that 62% of countries in the index suffer from a high to critical risk of corruption across their defense sectors. Now, this cuts across all regions of the world and all economic groups. If you look at this heat map here, that basically tells a story that all regions of the world have a mix of results. If we look at the country level, you would realize here that, again, within the regions, different countries have different scores, but only one country out of the 86 that were assessed in 2020 scores in the top category, and that's New Zealand, which you can see at the very bottom here. If we also take a look on the next page, one would realize that Sub-Saharan Africa and MENA, Middle East and North Africa, tend to have a bit of more pronounced risk and underlying issues which review weak institutional resilience to corruption, and most of these countries range, as you can see, most of them fall into the category of very high risk to critical risk. Now, looking at the individual five risk areas, what are some of the key highlights that we realize here? So, in defense policy making and political affairs, one of the key issues that the analysis of the GDI data revealed was that democratic oversight of the defense sector is under threat in a wide range of countries. In 31% of countries with strong formal rights, parliaments consistently failed to take advantage of their oversight powers or simply did not debate or review defense policy at all. Now, a variety of factors emerge as possible explanations for this. Populist-driven executive overreach or lack of expertise and staffing to support parliamentarians, or compromised information flows between ministries and the legislature. 84% of countries, which is a very good score, have anti-corruption policy in place, but only 54% of these countries have, or 50% of these countries have no implementation record. So that's concerning. Quickly turning to defense finances. In general, governments may publish three broad categories of budget documents. The initial budget adopted prior to the start of the fiscal year, a revised budget released during the fiscal year that shows changes in priorities, and an actual expenditure document at least here. Now, 52% of countries we assessed published disaggregated data on actual expenditure. 48% did not, review the difference between the budget and the actual expenditure that occurred. So we see that governments are frequently failing to report on actual defense spending. Another trend that emerged was that there was limited scrutiny of spending on secret items. About 40% of countries in the index did not provide the relevant legislative committee with information on secret items, which basically is the concern. In terms of personnel management, well, some good news there. That was the highest scoring area in the index, with overall globally scoring 53 over 100, so it's moderate risk of corruption. But then there are still significant challenges in this area because codes of conduct for military personnel in 40% of countries either did not address corruption issues or did not exist at all. Now, so some positive news on personnel management to not so welcome news in terms of military operations. Military operations stands out as the most compromised risk area. Globally, the average score was just 16 over 100, so that falls into the critical risk of corruption category. So this just essentially means that on the front line, there is significant potential for corruption to undermine military operations around the world, and be they aimed at securing peace internally or abroad. Now, if we delve a bit more into military operations and what the scores tell us is that we basically found out that for most countries, one thing that was missing was the inclusion of anti-corruption issues in their overarching military doctrine, which military doctrine, the overarching military doctrine can be a crucial element in laying the foundations for the development of strong corruption controls as part of military operations. Because the doctrine helps to establish the common standards, operating procedures, and for fulfilling objectives. But then few countries have included references to corruption in these doctrines. In fact, 70% of the 86 countries we assessed scored a 0 on this particular question of whether anti-corruption was included in the overarching military doctrine. So one can basically draw some analysis from this that for these countries, corruption is not officially considered as a strategic issue, or there are no firm guidelines on how to mitigate the associated risk when it comes to operations and corruption issues. In fact, out of these countries that scored a 0 for anti-corruption or may be mentioned in the overarching military doctrine, 14 of the 22 NATO countries that we assessed fell into this bracket. This disregard of corruption trickles down then to training and education, which we think are essential. Redeployment, anti-corruption training for commanders is essential. And then we would now quickly turn our attention to procurement. And I'll come back again to military operations in a bit because that's very, very important. So finally, in terms of procurement, procurement continues to be one of the most secretive and least accountable spheres of activity in the defense sector. In fact, the analysis of the GDI data showed us that nearly 30% of the countries in the index making no information available on the share of defense procurement that is conducted through open competition. Now, in terms of arms exports, for instance, 86% of global arms exports are originating from countries moderate with moderate to very high risk of corruption and are ending up in countries basically with very high or too high to critical risk of corruption. So 49% of arms are going into countries with high to critical corruption risk, which is a cause for concern. If we again delve a bit more into the procurement issue here, we would also, from the analysis that we did with the data, we take a closer look and we realize that 40% of the countries in GDI score a 0 for acquisition planning, and this includes 5 of the top 10 arms importers. So what does this mean? This means that these countries either have no clear process in place for acquisition planning, or the process exists, but they are not clear and contain few connections between purchases and strategic requirements. Again, a cause for concern. So out of these top 10, most basically are scoring in the critical risk category with only 3 in the low risk category, and that's an issue. So let's turn our attention to some of the key trends we see. We assessed 15 countries in Asia Pacific. Now, the overall score for Asia Pacific points to the fact that, so the averaging the 15 countries, the overall score falls into the high risk of corruption category. But of course, there are huge variations in the quality of defense governance mechanisms which determine how well these institutions can respond to these. So, because if we take a look at our region, Asia Pacific, for instance, the region is home to both the highest score in the index, which is New Zealand, and Myanmar, which is one of the lowest. But then, if we take one country, let's take Taiwan. Taiwan, for instance, also overperforms when compared to the regional scores and the global scores across the board in all the 5 key risk areas. But then one realizes that even though Taiwan scores quite well in political and financial and with personnel, that's very well in line with the trend across the index. Military operations still is an area where there is cause for concern with a high corruption risk category. So let's focus on operations, which has emerged as a key issue. Let's go back again to Asia Pacific. And looking at Asia Pacific, the overall score for the region was 24 over 100, very high corruption risk. But then it compares, to the overall average for the 22 NATO countries that we assessed. Again, G7, same score as G7. And this goes to underscore the point that operations is an issue across the board for all countries, and it requires serious attention. Again, looking at military operations, I think it's essential that, again, we take a look at why we keep saying this is a critical issue on the front line. We look at 8 of the top 10, 15 troop contributing countries to United Nations peacekeeping. And out of these 8 that we assessed, most fall into the critical risk of corruption category, which is again a key source for concern. So what does this all mean? What are we trying to actually point to here in military operations? Well, I'm just taking an example of the of 2 questions here. We are following the good practice standards and trying to assess whether there's comprehensive training on corruption issues for commanders at all levels, and whether this training is also delivered, one, as part of military education, and also prior to deployment for specific missions. Again, is corruption considered a strategic issue in forward planning? That is critical. So the good practice standards that we are trying to assess when it comes to military operations essentially requires corruption issues to be at the front and the center of both forward planning and training prior to deployments. So based on the key findings that we actually shared with you today, the key recommendations globally, based on the trends that we shared, is that business as usual would not work, and we need to elevate the discussion of defense governance and corruption risk in the political discourse. When we look at the political risk and defense policy making category, one of the key recommendations is for strengthening the capacity and the incentives for parliamentary oversight so that the legislator in the respective countries have the independence to enable effective scrutiny. In terms of defense finances, what it points to is that I think we need to enhance transparency of actual defense spending. And of course, there will be exceptions made for secret spending, but the appropriate committees should be given full access to it. In terms of personnel management, strengthening systems for dealing with wrongdoing, so whistleblowing mechanisms, and also ensuring that cases investigated and prosecuted or prosecuted through formal processes without undue influence will be vital. With military operations, anti-corruption needs to be integrated into military operations, with missions properly assessing and planning for corruption risk as part of troop training and during deployment. And for procurement also, one of the broad recommendations that we make is for the complete overhaul of procurement systems to provide for more open competition and transparency, and that there is clear delineation between what a country needs. So the procurement systems should be aligned to the national security strategy, and basically these should also be quite transparent, so that there is a clear match to what a country is buying and to what its strategic requirements are. Basically, with this, there should be very little exceptions made in terms of good practice, so that one can assess a logical flow down from the strategy to individual procurements without any exception. So I'd say that the GDI revealed significant weaknesses in governance of the defense sector globally. And even though defense and security is often cited as exceptional and outside the remit of standard governance reforms, I would argue that the principles of good governance still apply in the current global context, which is marked by shrinking civic space. I think now it is more important than ever to ensure that civil society have the space and the freedom and the voice to basically make known their concern and bring the expertise to the table, and creating space for all stakeholders, whether it be minorities or women's organizations, to engage in that oversight and processes remains crucial for effective scrutiny of defense governance. So overall, the evidence of the GDI underscores the pressing need for action to be taken to address the challenges in defense governance that I've shared with you globally. And I'll just end by saying that corruption in defense is a real and present danger. There are lots of resources that we have available, and as you can see on my screen here, we basically share the full data set of every country assessment that contains the explanations, the sources that underpin those explanations, the scores are all available for download on our website. And the other key document that I shared with you was the country briefs for each country. Those are also there. And then there's a fantastic GDI Global report that offers in-depth analysis across all the regions and the sectors, and also does cross-analysis with other indices. That's also available on the website. So I'll just end by saying thank you very much for your kind attention this morning.
All right. Very good. Thank you for Michael. I really appreciate Michael's presentation. Let me briefly introduce, let me briefly summarize Michael's presentation. At the beginning, he tried to summarize the origins of Government Defense Integrity Index, that is GDI, and then he also told us how can they get the GDI score, including the quantitative and qualitative items. And then totally they are asking 77 questions, including the 212 indicators. And then I would say the most important thing is the responses must be all well evidences. And then obviously the quantitative score is kind of a quartile system. That is from 0, 25, 50, 75 to 100. And then after that, after introduce the how can we produce the GDI score, and then Michael turned to analyze the analysis of the 2020's GDI, and then let us look at the whole global pictures of the different countries on the GDI scores. And then obviously the New Zealand have the best performance, and then Taiwan may be the second to New Zealand, but we also try to improve ourselves. That's why we are going to have this seminar today. And then after that, also look at what is the impacts of a global analysis. And then actually you find out, I mean, the score from the 86 to 49, and then also look at the focusing on the Asia Pacific countries. And by the end of your presentation, you also provide 5 recommendations. The first one is political. The second recommendation is related to finance. And then the third one will be the personnel management, and then the fourth dimension will be operational level, and then the last one will be the procurement recommendation. And then of course you say if we need any further more information, we can try to contact the Transparency International, or I mean we can have more dialogue after your presentation. So the following one, because we have several discussants in this panel, in this seminar, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to invite Peter Robertson. Professor Robertson, are you there? Would you mind to do some comments on Michael's presentation? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I prepared some PowerPoint presentations, but I don't know if there's a way for me to share those, so maybe I will just speak my comments instead.
I'm pretty much sure you can share your PowerPoint with our screen. Can we? 有办法吗? Yeah,
I'm
actually,
not sure.
You just click maybe your screen. They might have a share screen. Can you find it?
Yeah. I don't see any button that says share screen.
Peter, if I may help you, on the bottom of your screen you will see open share tray.
No.
You can see on the bottom of your screen you have the camera, and then microphone, and then open share tray.
Yep.
Yeah.
You found
Then
it?
you open your PowerPoint, and then you can select your PowerPoint.
Yeah. The power, okay. I hope this works. No, it's not giving me an option to show my PowerPoint. That's all right.
Okay, that's all right. I mean, just why not you just do your comments, and then probably if you can just send us your PowerPoints, and then I'm asking the administrators or assistants to collect all of the information. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so my first point is really that this is a very impressive research project. The range of issues that are investigated, the amount of data that is collected, the rigorous expectations for evidence and analysis, the multiple layers of review, all of those are very powerful methodological approaches that I think really lend a lot of credence to the data, to the findings of this report. I did have a question about who the country assessors were. Michael, you said a little bit more about that, but I scanned the report to see if there was more information about who those people were. I was kind of curious, you know, how they were hired, how they were selected, if they were full-time, and that. But the bottom line is that they all must have done a very good job and very thorough assessment of these issues. So all of that is to be correct. One of the features of the analysis that I was particularly impressed by was the distinction between existence, enforcement, and effectiveness. I think that's a really powerful distinction to try to assess all three of those features. Certainly, rather than just looking at the policies and the regulations and the rules, but to go beyond that to see how they're being enforced, how they're being utilized, is I believe, a very important aspect of this research as well. In that vein, I think the report did make some of the comparisons of the de jure scores to the de facto scores, and I thought that those were very interesting comparisons that maybe could be highlighted even more. Some of the comparisons showed up in the text, but I don't. But I just thought that that could be a more important feature of these analyses to see how the de facto approaches were maybe not matching the de jure policies, et cetera, that were in place. Obviously, the report, as Michael ended his discussion there, it provides, I think, compelling evidence of what we might think of as systemic risk. Obviously, some countries are more risky than others, but clearly across the board, looking at the global scenario as a whole, the fact that we have a high to critical risk levels in 62% of the countries, I think, is a little distressing. I was particularly taken by the very low scores for military operations, with the overall score around the world averaging only 16 out of 100. It kind of raises the question for me as to whether the rubric itself is trying to capture best practices, or whether the rubric is maybe really capturing some ideal conditions that may never really be met. I agree that we should be aiming high to instill those kind of best practices and those ideals into military operations, but with so many of the countries around the world not able to do that, I wonder if maybe that scale needs to be recalibrated a little bit to more accurately reflect what is realistic rather than what we would really desire in an ideal sense. One of the issues that I wanted to comment on that shows up in the report is the obvious link between the arms trade and the corruption and the risk of corruption in many countries. I know that 6 of the top 10 arms importers are in the MENA region, and all 6 of those have very high to critical corruption risks. And that raised to me the question as to whether really maybe the high volume of arms trade in some of these countries is in fact caused by or results from the fact that the potential for corruption in the defense sector is so prevalent. I wonder if some of these countries really don't need as much of the arms that they are purchasing, and maybe they do so in part because that's a way for some people to really use the corruption in that sector to benefit greatly. It also raised for me the question of whether we might consider overspending on defense itself as a form of corruption. If poor countries are spending a lot of money on arms and therefore are not spending money on other services for their people, this might be thought of as an element of corruption, especially if those acquisitions and purchases are a means by which the elite can continue to profit when they shouldn't be. Lastly, I came to the question of how we might mitigate corruption. Obviously, all of this analysis, the data, is oriented towards helping us figure out better ways to mitigate the corruption in the defense sector in countries around the world. The report tends to paint a picture of the differences between the global north and the global south. Obviously, the scores were on average better in the global north than in the global south. And as we tend to think of it in the international development arena, we tend to point to the global south as having more governance problems than in the global north. But in this case, I really wondered if the corruption that we're looking at is essentially enabled by countries in the north selling their arms to countries in the south. To the extent that that arms trade provides a venue within which corruption occurs, then to a considerable extent we can point our fingers at the countries in the north that are willingly sort of selling all their arms to the countries where they know that the risk of corruption is very high. And so that raised to me the question of whether the scores for countries that do sell their arms to countries with a high risk of corruption, do they get a lower score because of their participation in that trade? It seems to me that maybe they should. If they're contributing to the potential for corruption, that should take an edge off of their own corruption score. And finally, I guess the question remains as to whether we can realistically expect to mitigate corruption in the defense sector when the elites in many countries are the primary beneficiaries of the corruption in that sector. The very people who we would ask to make and enforce laws are likely, in many cases, the people who are benefiting from the corruption. And so maybe we are asking too much or expecting too much that those people with the most power in some of these countries would take steps to mitigate the corruption. So bottom line, this was very interesting. I appreciated having the chance to look at all of this information and the data and to learn about this work. I commend all of you who are involved in this very meaningful and important task. So thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight.
All right, thank you, Professor Robertson. You did a very good job on doing some comments on Michael's presentation. In order to save time, I'm not going to repeat your reviews and comments. And then the next one, I'm going to invite Paul Jobin to do some comments on Michael's presentation. Paul, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I have myself a few slides. I hope I can succeed to share it with you.
That's good. You did
see
it.
Something?
Yes. Very good.
Okay. Now, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I'm very honored. I'm not a specialist of military issues. My research field is in environmental sociology, and for 2 decades now I've been conducting research on industrial risk, industrial pollution, but because I live in Taiwan, and it's difficult to ignore that risk for China, I have come to pay more and more attention to these issues, and also because I have the chance to work at the Institute of Sociology, and I have been lucky to be invited by my colleagues who stand as a coordinator of a research team. There is an echo. Let me try to fix this. Oh. I'm sorry, there is some echo. Do you have this kind of echo over there?
No, the sound system sounds pretty good to us. Thank you. No problem. No echo. Thank you.
Is the sound is okay for you? Okay, maybe I will try to put this. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you clearly.
Otherwise, there was some echo. So as I said, at the Institute of Sociology, I have invited my colleagues to pay some more attention to these issues. My feeling was that there's a couple of research conducted by sociologists on the relation between the military and the civilians in Taiwan, but they are either was dispersed or most of the research is being conducted by political scientists or specialists of international relations, but we don't see much materials from sociology. So for the last 2 years, we have organized a couple of lectures on this issue. And last year we had a workshop, and we were glad to have the presentation of Professor Xavier and Jimin also a very important contribution. That's just to introduce myself. I'm sorry. Just some caveats to let you understand that I'm really not super familiar as you are on these issues. But I remember well Professor Chen Jimin's presentation last year at the workshop organized at iOS, and his tremendous work on the Transparency International and the Government Defense Anti-Corruption Index. And I guess we see the result of those efforts in the presentation of Dr. Mosoti, which are really impressive, as Dr. Peter just mentioned. Since Taiwan were not sure right after New Zealand, which is quite impressive. But my question is, do Taiwanese know about all this, and do they care about it? If from my sociological perspective, is saying, which Taiwanese society you care about this issue or not? Maybe not. Maybe yes, maybe not. So give you a few hints about this level of awareness on this issue of transparency in Taiwan. I have borrowed some data compiled by my colleague at iOS, Josh Wenger, who is the US, is also based in Taiwan, at iOS. And he has compiled many surveys which have been conducted for the last decades on civil-military relations surveyed from Taiwan and abroad. And if we look at, for example, this survey on the level of trust in different institutions, including one is about the military, we see that there was the confidence in military in Taiwan declined after the mid-1990s, but and it was lowest during the Chen Shui-bian's late period. and the presidency of Mainichu. But it rebounded after Tsai Ing-wen became president in 2016. And the trust in military correlated with support for governing party. So here, PANGU stands for support for the KMT and other Red B for China parties, while the Pine Green is for the DPP and other relatively pro-independent parties. So you see the rebel was very strong in the 1990s, and especially for the blue KMT parties, but it declined sharply after Chen Shui-bian became president. And just as I say, and the difference between the parties is quite obvious that when, for example, if KMT is at the government, then there would be a strong confidence in the military from family voters. And the same phenomenon, if the DPP is at the government, then the government, then the Pan Green voters will be likely to support and to have confidence in the military. So this is an interesting phenomenon which might interfere with the perception of transparency and corruption regarding this issue. Also, military. What is more impressive is that whatever the government, military in Taiwan is one of the most trusted institutions, and this is not whatever the government. But the trust fluctuates closely with trust in central government. So it's not that there is always some strong support, but it's not from the same people. By the way, it's I have a question for Ofori because in last GDI rank index, this question about public trust in the institution is mentioned as is the indicator is not scored for in the country, and I just wonder why. Since we have in Taiwan, we do have those indicators and surveys about this, but I was just wondering why at international level it's not mentioned. I have a few more minutes. Just some comment on to say that the trust in military was very low from 2010, but it's now higher in Germany and South Korea, which we can take as a there's reference country for so this is really impressive. Lastly, the Bofang Institute for National Defense was the first to survey general approval of military using the word impression. What is your impression of the military? Is it good or bad? And we can see that the recent surveys show more than 60% of positive impression, which is also very impressive. And if also interestingly, the GoFang and the INDR also ask about compare approval impression with confidence in willing to fight or war-fighting spirit, and also disaster management. And we see for all those categories, the scores are quite high. I mean, there is a strong confidence of the Taiwanese into the military. And I guess this is not disconnected from the work that has been done to increase the transparency and the anti-corruption measures taken in Taiwan. You know, actually, I'm originally from France. I still have French citizenship. Also recently became Taiwanese, so I feel both French and Taiwanese. And as a French living in Taiwan, talking about the military and corruption issues, I have always felt very ashamed of what occurred 30 years ago with the scandals of the frigates in the Mirage. And I think we don't know what really happened at the time because the documents are still not disclosed. But since France agrees to French companies that pay national money, again, the French did the wrong. And the Taiwanese were victims of that, of the issues, because Taiwan, is big among the international scene because of lack of a seat at the UN. And then some countries can take advantage of this situation to push for corruption. But I think what has been done so far is that one has increased the barriers to prevent this kind of wrongdoings. Lastly, I just briefly mentioned that another survey was conducted recently by my colleague at the Institute of Sociology, Jianing, Zhenzhou, in Zhonghua, have another thematic research group called the China Impact Factor, TRE, and they are still conducting analysis, but this survey was the results came in last June, so after Ukraine war, but before Nancy Pelosi's visit in Taiwan. So they show a more ambivalent. They seem to show more ambivalent positions on the level of confidence, of trust that Taiwanese have regarding the current defense policy, but it's exactly how. So, but here again, we have to go into details to see how those sentiments differ if we look different variables like age or party allegiance or other factors. I think those two variables are important. That they either we know that the importance of pan blue, green variable in the previous slide. So I get this also really is a good quite different. And lastly, and I think this is also has to do with transparency, is the fact that in spite of a lot of false information or fake news or biased information coming from China, now from Russia about the international situation, and a certain penetration of those fake news in Taiwan, their survey showed that Taiwanese can show some good resistance to biased information. And they're quite healthy regarding this fake news. And for example, regarding there's in some countries the view that the invasion of Ukraine resulted from NATO's provocation. This view has had some success in some countries, and not in France in particular, or Japan, but not Taiwan. And that's interesting to see that. And I just wonder how much this can be can affect the perception of the level of transparency and anti-corruption measures can for the public perception of it. I think that will be all for my comments. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Paul, for your comments. And then because in Michael's presentation, I especially take notes. He say every responses must be well evidenced. And then Paul just provide war value survey and also Asian parameter survey and also China impact factor data set, and doing some descriptive analysis to focusing on the public support on the military, also some public perception of misinformation. I would say those information will be the important sources for the Ministry of National Defense. And in the near future, if you're going to provide all of the informations, that might be some sources you can use. And then the next one we are going to I'm going to ask Xavier. Xavier, are you there? Xavier. Okay, doing some comments and try to make it a little bit short because this seminar will be supposed to be ended at 3 o'clock, and then we still have some discussions on floor. Thank you. Xavier,
Sorry,
the time is yours. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the time is yours. Thank you.
Well, just to present myself, I'm Xavier. Actually, I'm a journalist and a fixer for foreign media in Taiwan, so mostly French. Of course, because of the risk of war in Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait has always been an issue. But the war in Ukraine really triggered something. So this last month, we've seen lots of foreign media coming to Taiwan and they're trying to understand how Taiwan can defend itself against the Chinese threats. And they usually try to compare the situation between the Ukraine war in Ukraine, and in Taiwan. And I would like to say thank you to Michael Ofori-Mensah for his presentation. Actually, it's very interesting. I would like to ask you a question about how can we improve actually the use of the civil society in the fight against corruption? Because, as I said, I'm from France, and we try to improve some mechanism by creating different groups, independent groups who work beside the government and try to monitor actually the activity in the French government, but also in the military armed force. So, is it something that you think it's difficult to improve in different countries? Is it cultural or how to put that actually? Yeah. So yeah, that's the main question to have the time to answer that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your brief comment. And then actually we're going to go to the first round discussion. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
You have some
no
echo? All right. The following one, I'm going to ask the Professor Chen Junming. He's a professor of Department of Public Administration at Shixing University. So, Professor Chen, thank you.
I think, thank you so much. I think there are two questions I would raise for Michael. The first one is, since we have the category of policy making, especially about the legislators' expertise, because the question is about how would the legislators to oversight or watching the Ministry of National Defense. And so I'm not quite sure, do you have any suggestion or policy suggestions or recommendations for the countries, especially from the Ministry of National Defense, to do something to help legislators to have their what we call expertise, to help them to equip with necessary what we call expertise or some knowledge about the national defense? Because to my limited knowledge about legislators in Taiwan, I don't think that the legislators, even he or she, is working for the Committee of National Defense. They have enough knowledge of what we call expertise to exercise their power to oversight to the Ministry of National Defense. So do you have any recommendations for assess the country to especially those who are assessed, I mean Ministry of National Defense, to help them? Although it's kind of irony, supposedly the legislator should have the basic knowledge or expertise to access his or her power, but actually it's not so, at least not quite so. So that's why I'm asking, do you have any suggestions or recommendations for a case, at least in Taiwan? And the second one is, how would you assess the impact of this particular, what we call GDI? Because I try to anchoring with Professor Peter Robertson, because he mentioned the category of military operations. It seems to me that the ends a little bit too high because average score around the world, across the country, is only 16. So if most countries cannot live up to that particular criteria, or at least probably they have to do much, much more in the near future to try to get a good score in terms of so-called military operations. So again, according to your personal experience or what you have, the experience contacting with all the countries who have been assessed, do any countries try to find ways to help them to build up this kind of I would say score lower than expected? Any way to help them to do that? And a relevant issue is that do countries, especially those ranked lower or have much higher risk, do they care about the result? Or do we have a kind of impact? Since we have done this particular GDI nationwide or worldwide survey for at least 3 times, do you think it helped those countries who has been assessed doing a little bit better, or some countries just ignore the result? Okay, so this is the second question. And by the way, since Professor Paul, we met last year in what we call sociology workshop. It's about the Asia Pacific region because I presented my paper, and Dr. Su, he was the assessor. So I think that you mentioned that I think it's quite essential question is about, do people in Taiwan, take that very seriously? The impact, the result of that particular assessment. The GDI, do people in Taiwan, I think the question should be this way, to my opinion. Do the Ministry of National Defense get this particular information, especially they have been ranked relatively well, and to the audience, to the ordinary people, because I don't think the people in Taiwan don't think many knows about this particular assessment, or worldwide. I think it's probably a very important issue, but since, to me, I think I will agree with Professor Paul, because I don't think that I heard anyone who made comment agree or disagree the result. Nobody talk about that, discuss that. So I think, again, probably people in, chapter in Taiwan should do more things about to get people informed about this particular result or this kind of assessment, since it's a kind of, to me, a kind of very powerful weapons to help the Ministry of National to do more things about that. Okay, thank you very much.
Good comments. All right, actually, in order to demonstrate, we do really cares about the GDI. You can tell, actually, that is why we try to find the best scholars of national defense, and also we have already invited some officials of the Ministry of National Defense. And I'm going to asking, do we have more discussions? Going to ask some questions for Michael's presentation. Michael, if they don't have anyone, actually, I have a very brief question. For example, say like public support for national defense. So because in your presentation you say all of the responses must be all well evidenced. So in that case, it means that we have to collect some survey data, or what kinds of data for like elite interviews, or we have to collect more like a war value survey. That is a kind of a comparative that is initiated by Ronald Inglehart, and then that is comparative perspective, doing lots of countries focusing on all different political developments. What I'm trying to say is, for example, I'm just trying to measure the concept of the public support for national defense. So what kinds of exact data you suggest we try to provide to you for the whole evaluation? Thank you. So we have a few minutes left. Michael, would you mind to, probably you have 3 or 4 minutes to respond all of the comments. Yeah, I know the time is limited. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you to all the discussants, and thank you as well. I think the questions are fascinating, and I really, really appreciate each and every bit of feedback and comment. It's fascinating. Could I just maybe start with it's so interesting that Peter mentioned, one key issue where who do we actually also look at? It's just, you actually cited the distinction between those in the global south normally have been highlighted as those with the problem. And I just thought I'll just share this with you. I took it out of the presentation because I didn't want it to just distract the attention, but this is the classic case of take the United Kingdom. It's scored in the low risk of corruption category, but if you look at it, where is it exporting arms to? It's exporting arms mainly to countries who are, that's the top 5 countries the United Kingdom exports to, and 2 of them are in the critical risk of corruption category, and 1 in the high risk, and with India and the low risk. Unfortunately, there are not many indicators that assess the external aspects of the defense sector. Most of the indicators are focused on internal mechanisms. So that's again one of the drawbacks of the index. So you might have countries like the UK scoring very well, but are contributing, like you rightly said, to issues of corruption risk or exacerbating corruption risk in the South. The key point here is for us to look at it again, balance maybe the risk, but for countries like exporting countries to use the DDI as a measure of due diligence when they're exporting. So let me quickly run through some of the other things. Again, I think maybe I raised the question, what can civil society do? Well, yes, civil society plays a very key role here. And I think it's quite essential that civil society works together with government. But the sticking point has always been the defense exceptionalism, that it's an area of secrecy, and across the world, for the most part, we realize that there are barriers. We work with Transparency International local chapters across the world, and most of them face difficult conditions, and even trying to get that entry to engage with governments across the world. So I think the index is published not as a means of naming and shaming government, but as to improve governance practices. And I think we just need to emphasize that message of just trying to say it's a matter of trying to improve processes and procedures, and keep on with the engagement. But there are significant barriers, like you mentioned, not yet in the global south, but across the world for civil society organizations. And we just need to keep going and raising the profile of the conversation and highlighting the risk. I think as we keep going on with this conversation, hopefully doors will open. Being here with you today is one of those things. We work at a close society organization. I've had invitations to work with NATO, and I think through that we trickle down to the NATO countries, and then raising the level of the conversation as we go along. But it is a big challenge, and I think it requires everybody working together to raise that point, that issue up. The issue of I think it might be Peter as well, who are the country assessors. I would say they are experts within the country mostly, and there's a very detailed description of them. And we have a methodology paper that is on our website that explains it very clearly and the steps. So not to take up too much time here, I'll go on that. Now, the issue of trust also came up. And one thing is that we don't actually score that question of trust in national military. And it doesn't have to do with lack of data per se within some countries, well, within countries like Taiwan, for instance, data. But we realize that as of now, there's no standardized the methodology for compiling this differs across the board, and there's a very varied way of measuring the data. And so, even though we collect the qualitative data, we specifically don't score them. Because once you start scoring that data, you might have a variance in the way it's been scored, and it might be skewed across the area. So there's a specific and deliberate reason why we don't do that. But then we collect it anyway, and then research it and use it for trying to gauge what it is in the national context. But just for now, because it's not actually quite standardized across the board, for African countries, you realize that there's the Afrobarometer, and that actually measures it in a very different way than we would find in some other parts of the world. How do countries respond to the GDI? That's a question that came up as well. It varies. It varies a lot from country to country. We have different ministries of national defense. First of all, the response to the GDI would even start by when you ask the government to review the GDI. Some countries just flatly say no. Other countries review the index, provide lengthy responses, provide additional information. Some other countries again come back again to engage afterwards, to tell you we realize that these are the gaps, and we are putting in place, a team to address the concerns that have been flagged. Other countries don't respond so positively, would come back again, trying to counter some of the evidence that has been found. So it depends. It actually the effect ranges from different countries, but then the fact that some countries are even highlighting issues shows that to some extent anyway there is concern, and you realize this across the board. I realize that the time is gone for you to.
All right, no problem. Okay, this seminar, the time is almost up. It is 5 after 3, and then I have to make it an end. And thank you for Michael's presentation and all of the panelists for those excellent comments. And if you have any further, remember Professor Robertson, just email us your PowerPoint, and then the assistant's going to collect all of the information. Might be helpful for building our GDI in the near future. All right, so I'm going to give it to the lady we're going to have the break, and then we'll be back roughly 20 minutes, and then we are going to have the next seminar, and then the title will be the Transnational Benchmark, Learning for GDI Index. All right, thank you.
All right, let's give a big hand to our panelists and our moderator and all our speakers. Thank you for your insightful speech. Thank you so much. 好，各位现场所有的长官贵宾，接下来是我们中场休息的时间。我们下一个阶段的议程是在3:30要准时开始。那现在呢，我们中场休息，我们邀请现场所有的贵宾呢，可以移动的脚步到我们的外头，这边有茶水来做享用。那记得在我们3:25左右的时间呢，就赶快的进到我们的场内来做预备。下一个阶段议